He screamed, ordering her to get an abortion. She agreed and marked the date on the calendar. But when he arrived at the clinic, filled with regret, he saw her already leaving. "It's over," she said, not even glancing back. "You don't have to worry anymore." 8 months later, he saw her belly, and everything clicked. She hadn't aborted the pregnancy. She just cut him out of the story. Now, was it too late to make amends? The price of silence. A second chance at love. The thing that keeps a man with a woman isn't love. It's obligation. The pronouncement was delivered with the same nonchalance someone might use when spreading butter on a piece of toast. It was a Tuesday night, warm and generally unremarkable, just like most evenings in that quiet house, where the only sounds were the clinking of silverware and the rhythmic creaking of the rocking chair out on the porch. Robert Sterling's father uttered the statement between sips of his beer and bites of his steak, never even looking at his son. And it was there, at that very table, enveloped by the encroaching darkness of the living room, that Robert came to understand, or perhaps just accepted, that he was living a life that wasn't his choice. Rose, who was sitting across from him, didn't even bother to look up. She was quite used to these weighty statements delivered in a mild tone. The words didn't sting her as acutely as they might have. They hurt, yes, but she'd already developed a thick callus. She simply continued spreading butter on her toast, her eyes fixed downward, and silently wondered why she even bothered trying anymore. They had gotten married young. The townspeople had whispered that they were deeply in love. Some had even placed bets that theirs would be one of those everlasting loves that could withstand the harshest trials. But those who truly knew Robert, and perhaps even Robert himself wasn't among them, were aware that he had only married Rose because his father had decided it was time. Because Rose was a good girl from a respectable family, with perpetually clean hands and eyes too kind to ever refuse. The problem was that Rose genuinely loved him. Not in a melodramatic soap opera type of way, but the kind of love that just existed simply because it did. Because she couldn't imagine living any other way. She loved his moments of quiet, his controlled demeanor, and even the flaws that everyone else seemed to criticize. She truly believed that, with enough time, his heart would finally awaken. But time doesn't awaken anything that's truly locked away. Robert, for his part, never quite knew how to handle Rose's affection. He often felt it was too much, that it suffocated him. He also felt a deep sense of guilt, not because he didn't love her in return, but because she never seemed to notice his lack of love. When Rose would smile and say, "I made you cinnamon coffee, just the way you like it," he would feel a knot tightening in his stomach. He wanted to thank her, but the words wouldn't come. He wanted to smile, but his mouth felt like it was made of solid stone. His love resided in the past, attached to a name he kept hidden, like a secret that burned within him. He never mustered the courage to tell Rose, not because she needed to hear it. She already knew. Women always know these things, but she preferred to pretend otherwise. The house they lived in was simple, built by the hands of both of their fathers. It had exposed brick walls, a comforting smell of firewood, and windows that let in the mountain breeze. But what blew inside wasn't just a breeze. It was a palpable sense of absence. Rose moved around the house like a lone dancer. She tended to the plants in the courtyard, hung freshly washed sheets that smelled of soap, and wrote little notes that she would hide in the pockets of his shirts. Silly little notes like, "Today, I dreamed of us on the beach," or "You smiled in your sleep last night." He read them, he kept them, but he never responded. The villagers thought he was cold. Rose would simply say that he was just tired, that one day he would wake up a changed man. But the days turned into weeks, and he didn't wake up. During one particularly rainy night, everything almost changed. Rose developed a high fever. She was shaking and drenched in sweat, her eyes unfocused, and her body felt as fragile as a wet dish rag. Robert ran to the village pharmacy, soaked to the bone. He returned with medicine, warm towels, and a desperate silence. He stayed by her side all night long, changing her compresses, adjusting the blanket, and murmuring things he didn't even know he knew how to say. When the fever finally broke, she fell asleep, resting against his chest, and he didn't move a muscle. He stayed there, staring at the ceiling, with the distinct feeling that something inside him was trying to be born, but ultimately wasn't. The next morning, she woke up and saw him there. She smiled tenderly, wanting to forever capture that moment in her memory. He simply got up and said that he had to go to work. It was as if nothing had happened, but something, however small and discreet, had indeed occurred. Still, the distance between them remained, a chasm without a bridge, marked only by tentative gestures from one side and unyielding walls from the other. Rose started talking less, stopped writing the little notes, and kept the coffee and her own small sips to herself. The silence between them grew until it became a palpable presence. It was no longer something to avoid, but rather what filled all the spaces. She would gaze out the window, watching the tree branches dance in the wind, and wondered when she had started living like this. When she had stopped trying to be happy and had begun merely trying to endure. Maybe it was on their wedding day. Maybe it was after the first thank you he didn't say. Maybe it had never even begun. Robert felt the crushing weight of expectations on his chest like a sandbag that no one else could see. He blamed Rose for being there, for that house, for the role he played so poorly. But deep down, he knew that the problem wasn't her. It was him. It always had been. It was simply easier to place the blame than to admit the truth. His father always said, "A real man swallows his pain and moves on. Love is for the weak." And Robert swallowed everything. The boredom, the discomfort, the desire to simply disappear. He swallowed Rose whole. One night, he arrived home later than usual. He had spent hours driving aimlessly just to avoid having to come home. As he walked in, he found the house dark, except for a single lamp on in the corner of the living room. Rose was there, sitting on the sofa with a book on her lap that she clearly wasn't reading. "I thought you weren't coming," she said, with neither anger nor reproach in her voice. "I'm here now," was all he replied, and he sat down at the other end of the room. They said nothing more to each other. They simply stayed there, two silent figures, breathing slowly, as if the night itself could somehow heal what their love couldn't. Outside, the rain fell softly. Inside, the emptiness was thick and dense, like a third inhabitant of that house. And so, between unspoken words, forgotten notes, and shared silences, their marriage took shape, not with promises or with kisses, but with pauses, long, painful, deep pauses. Without either of them saying it aloud, and perhaps precisely because of that, they both knew that something was about to change. They just didn't know what yet. The silence between them is deafening, and yet it promises a coming storm. Have you ever felt this kind of profound, unspoken disconnect in a relationship? What would you do to break free? Share your insights in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for the heartbreaking truth to unfold. That morning, the sky looked washed out, neither blue nor gray, as if the day itself had forgotten how to begin. Robert left early without saying where he was going. Rose heard the door close with that cruel lightness of someone who had already learned to leave internally long before their body physically moved. She stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling, and felt a different kind of silence settle over her. It was no longer just the silence between them, but a silence that was inside of her. As if her body knew, even before her mind did, that something had broken and would never be repaired. The days that followed were filled with increasing turmoil. He started coming home later and later. Sometimes he didn't sleep at home at all. Other times, he would return with the unmistakable scent of another woman clinging to his clothes. Rose didn't ask any questions. She had learned that some answers simply weren't worth the bitter taste of the question. Until the night, he didn't even bother to hide it anymore. They were having dinner, or at least attempting to have dinner. 2 plates served, 2 chairs occupied, and a vast abyss stretching out between them. He dropped his fork onto the table with a sharp clatter and said, "I want a divorce." Rose slowly raised her eyes, not with surprise, but like someone finally confronting something she had always known was coming. "I never loved you," he continued, without a moment's hesitation. "My heart has always belonged to someone else." She remained perfectly still. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just took a deep breath, trying to hold her entire body in place. Inside, the ground had opened up beneath her, but outwardly, she simply got up from the table, picked up her plate, and carried it over to the sink. He stared at her, completely bewildered by her lack of reaction. He had expected a scene. He had expected guilt, but all he received was a silence that cut deeper than any words ever could. That night, Rose didn't sleep. She sat out on the terrace, wrapped in a blanket, her feet numb with cold. She looked out at the empty street and wondered how it was possible that, even having sensed everything that was happening, it still hurt so much. 2 days later came the dizziness, the nausea, the missed period. She knew her body was telling her once again, even before the test did. But she took the test anyway, alone at a pharmacy in the village center where no one would meet her eyes and everyone knew too much. Positive. She returned home with the test result folded tightly in her coat pocket. She sat down on the bed, took a deep breath, and waited for him to come home. She needed to tell him. It was the least she could do. Robert walked in as usual. No knock, no glance. He threw his bag down in a corner and went straight into the bathroom. When he came out, Rose was standing in the center of the room. "I'm pregnant." He froze. His eyes blinked slowly, as if his brain was refusing to process what he had just heard. "What? Pregnant?" she repeated, her voice clear and steady. He took a step backward, almost laughing nervously. "No, it can't be." He ran a hand across his face. "You must be mistaken." "I'm not." Silence. And then the explosion. "Abort it." The word landed like a physical blow. "I'm already out. I'm not sticking around for a mistake that I didn't choose." She didn't move. She didn't gasp in surprise. She didn't plead. She simply replied, "It's fine. I'll take care of it." And it was that calmness, that complete lack of resistance, that made him sigh with relief. He thought that she had finally understood that this was it. That now he could leave with a clear conscience. But what he didn't see, what he never seemed to see, was that behind that calm exterior was something else entirely. There was a plan forming. Or rather, there was something growing inside her. Something he would never comprehend. In the days that followed, Rose pretended to go on with her life as usual. She cleaned the house, took short walks on the village paths, and avoided the neighbors. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with pity. She just smiled politely, not showing her teeth. She carried the secret like someone carrying a knife in their pocket, cold, sharp, and ultimately necessary. Robert started going out even more. And when he was home, he remained silent and withdrawn, spending more time on his phone than looking at her. And still, Rose watched him. Every gesture, every flicker of doubt, every new line of weariness etched on his face. One night, they sat at the table in silence, as always, but something hung heavy in the air. "Have you spoken to a lawyer yet?" she asked, not looking up from her plate. "Not yet, but I will," he replied dryly. "When you want me to sign, just let me know." He nodded, and she looked back down at her plate, but she didn't eat. She just pushed the food around, like someone searching for something that was never there. Later, lying in bed, Rose tenderly caressed her own belly, still flat, still invisible. She thought about what would become of that baby. She thought about how to protect something so fragile in a world where no one seemed to hold anything with both hands anymore. She still didn't know exactly what she was going to do. She only knew what she wasn't going to do. The next morning, while he was still asleep, she wrote something on the bathroom mirror with her lipstick. "I wish you peace, even if it's not with me." And then she went out for a walk. In the village market, she saw a middle-aged woman holding a child in her arms. The child was laughing, covered in flower petals, and hugged his mother, his little feet dangling. Rose couldn't look away. She felt an overwhelming urge to cry, but she didn't. When she returned home, Robert had already left. In the kitchen, his mug was still on the counter with traces of cold coffee. She washed it with slow, almost delicate movements, as if by cleaning the mug, she could somehow erase all of the pain. Later, she sat down at the table and began to write, not letters or farewells, but plans. She thought about roots, about names, about what it would be like to flee, not out of fear, but out of love, a love that was now only hers and that of the being growing silently within her, protecting her from the inside out. And that night, as she went to bed, she looked up at the dark ceiling and whispered, "You don't need anyone else. I have you." And that was enough. The quiet strength of a mother. What brave steps would you take to protect your child from a painful past? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for the continuation of this inspiring story. Across town, Robert was drinking with friends who didn't truly know him, with women who didn't truly care for him. He laughed loudly, as if the world was simple, as if everything was fine. But deep down, there was something strange, an echo of discomfort, an unease, an emptiness that no amount of alcohol could fill. He didn't know yet that the biggest lie of the whole story was about to begin, and that, for the first time in his life, Rose was not the victim. She was the author. And like any author of a story she no longer wanted to live, Rose picked up an invisible pen and began to rewrite her destiny with trembling but firm hands. The next dawn, before the first rooster crowed, she left the village without a sound. She carried a small suitcase, the test results hidden among her cotton clothes, and the last photograph of their marriage, not out of nostalgia, but as a constant reminder of what would never be again. The bus pulled away from the curb, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Rose didn't look back, not out of strength, but out of pure exhaustion. Behind her lay a house where love had never truly entered. Through the bus's misty window, she saw the outlines of the hills gradually fading into the fog, as if the world she was leaving behind was slowly erasing itself. Her destination was San Jeronimoya, a forgotten village nestled in the arid hills of Oaxaca, Mexico. That's where Dona Mercedes, her maternal grandmother, lived, a woman with small, piercing eyes and a firm voice, whose face bore every lived year as a seal of wisdom. Rose didn't announce her arrival. She simply appeared. When Dona Mercedes opened the door, she said nothing. She just looked at her granddaughter, her eyes swollen and silence clinging to her like a second skin, and understood everything. She let her in, pointed to the bed in the back room, and went back to her sewing as if it were any other day. Because women like her didn't make a scene, they offered refuge. The first day passed without any questions. The second day, too. Only on the third day, while they were separating corn kernels for the chickens, did her grandmother say, "If you're hungry, eat. If you want to cry, cry. But don't live with all that locked inside you." Rose bit her lip and didn't reply. She kept shelling corn until her fingers burned. It was easier to feel physical pain than to speak about it. Time in that village moved at a different rhythm. There was no internet, no constant rush, no uncomfortable stairs. Only dry earth, a constant wind, and barefoot children running on dirt roads. Rose started dressing like the local women. Long, flowing skirts, cotton blouses, and her hair always tied back. It was an attempt to simply disappear. At the small local health center, a soft-spoken nurse listened to the baby's heartbeat for the first time. Rose closed her eyes. It was a dull, but strong and insistent drumbeat. She cried silently, her head resting on the worn sheet of the examination table, not out of sadness, but because in that sound, there was life, and she knew that she needed to start over. The lie came from the mouth of a curious neighbor. "You look like you've been a mother." Rose hesitated, but replied, "I was, but I lost it." The lie stung, but it also provided a shield of protection. The news spread quickly throughout the village. Soon, everyone believed that she was there recovering from a loss, and in a way she was just not the one they thought. In the days that followed, Rose helped her grandmother with the sewing, tended to the plants, and read books that had been gathering dust on the shelves for years. She wrote letters she never sent, jotted down possible names for the baby, and practiced smiling in front of the mirror. She was relearning how to simply exist. At night, out on the terrace with her feet resting on an old cushion, she would listen to her grandmother murmur her prayers and felt that, perhaps for the first time in her life, she was safe. "You don't need to run anymore. Dona Mercedes said one of those nights, as she sewed a sky-blue blanket with infinite patience. But you can't hide forever either. Rose looked down, hugging her discreetly growing belly. I'm not hiding. I'm just waiting to be strong. Strength isn't waited for, child. It's created. That phrase resonated within her for days. In the village, she met Letitia, a middle-aged woman with 2 children and a painful past that she didn't hide. They became friends through shared silence, the kind who understood each other with a simple glance and shared secrets without ever uttering them aloud. It was Letitia who, one afternoon, asked her directly, "If he changes, would you forgive him?" Rose didn't hesitate. Forgiving isn't the hard part. The hard part is trusting again. And that was the crux of it all. Trust isn't mended with apologies. It's like glass. And broken glass isn't mended with thread. Time continued to pass, as if trying to heal all wounds. But Rose knew that there was no cure. There was only choice. And she chose to move forward. Then came the day she scheduled the appointment, not because she wanted to, but because she needed to feel that she had some semblance of control, that she was the one making the decisions. The eve before, she stayed awake all night, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, her hand resting on her belly. She spoke to the baby without words, only with her thoughts. It was as if she were saying, if you're going to be born into a world where no one wants you, it's better not to be born at all. But her heart pounded strongly, insistently, as if answering, I'm here, and I want you. That same night, on the other side of the city, Robert had a dream. In the dream, Rose emerged from a white clinic, her hands stained with blood, her eyes empty, and there was a strange sound, not a scream, not silence, but a constant, heartbreaking cry, the cry of a baby. He woke up drenched in sweat, his chest pounding as if he had run for miles, and for the very first time he felt fear. Without thinking, he grabbed his car keys and started driving, non-stop, as if the wheels themselves knew the way. He arrived at the clinic just as dawn was breaking. The street was deserted. A cold wind blew through, dragging dust along the pavement. And then he saw her. Rose emerged slowly from the clinic, her steps heavy, her face downcast, her head bowed low. He ran towards her. Rose! She stopped, but she didn't look up at him. It's done. I had it removed. The words were uttered like a blade, without hesitation, without drama, just said. He stared at her, his mouth opening and closing without making a sound. You don't have to worry anymore. And she kept walking. He fell to his knees right there on the dirty sidewalk. The world spun around him. Everything inside him screamed, no! But it was too late. Or at least that's what he believed. What he would never know was that she hadn't done anything at all. She had simply decided not to share anything more with someone who never stayed. That lie was the final act of love, or perhaps of self-preservation, because she knew that from that moment on, whatever she carried inside was solely hers. And for someone who had finally learned how to stay away, a lie told for protection was a truth that cut deeper than any blade. What would you do if you were Robert, consumed by guilt and a shocking revelation? Share your raw emotions in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for the next chapter of this powerful story. Later, lying again in the simple bed at her grandmother's house, Rose tenderly caressed her belly. They think you don't exist, she whispered. But you do, and so do I. In the darkness, with her eyes still damp, she finally drifted off to sleep, for the first time in months, without a burden. Because now, yes, she was the one writing the story and no one else. And that phrase, unspoken on Rose's lips, now echoed in Robert's life like a sentence. He had returned home after seeing her leave the clinic, or believing that she had left there with an empty womb and a shattered soul, carrying a weight he couldn't immediately name. In the first few days, he tried to act as if nothing had happened. He talked to his friends, laughed at the same old jokes, and went out drinking. But there was something fundamentally different about everything. A dull, discordant sound behind the music, a lack of taste in the drinks, an inability to laugh that he couldn't quite explain. The house, once so silent, now screamed at him. The objects weren't simply there. They seemed to be judging him. The teapot, the old curtain she washed every week, the blue blanket folded neatly on the sofa. Everything served as a constant reminder of what he had never learned how to value. Robert walked through the rooms like someone wandering through ruins. And no matter how hard he tried to convince himself that he was finally free, something deep inside him knew that he had lost something far greater than any freedom. He started avoiding his reflection in the mirror. His own eyes seemed to accuse him. There was something in them he didn't recognize: unease and profound regret. One night, while opening the bedside table drawer, searching for some kind of sleep aid, he stumbled upon the little notes, those small messages that Rose had left in his pockets, among his clothes, or tucked into his notebooks. He had read them at the time, yes, but he had never given them any real importance. Now each phrase felt like a dagger twisting in his heart. You smiled in your sleep last night. I watched you for hours. You seemed happy. I made cinnamon coffee. I know you prefer it strong, but today I felt you needed something sweet. And then, at the very bottom of the drawer, folded into fourths, as if someone were hiding a fragile piece of their soul, was the final note. If you ever truly love me, I hope there's still time. He read it aloud, once, twice, 3 times, and then he broke. It wasn't a pretty cry. It was a complete collapse. His body huddled on the floor, racked with muffled sobs, his hands trembling, his throat burning. He cried like someone who had never truly learned how to cry. He was someone who had always suppressed everything and could no longer contain it. That night, the weight of his actions truly crashed down on him. It wasn't just the divorce request. It wasn't only the rejected pregnancy. It was the culmination of all the days she had tried, all the things she had insisted on, and how he, in response, had failed her miserably. Regret didn't come as a mere thought. It manifested as a palpable presence. A crushing weight settled on his neck, an echo reverberated through the walls, and a voice incessantly repeated, "She stayed, and you left." Friends drifted away, not out of malice, but because they simply didn't know how to navigate the person he had become. Robert was irrevocably changed. He didn't drink with the same abandon. His laughter lacked its former resonance. He carried a lost look, perpetually searching for something that no one could possibly restore. One day he found himself at the park where he and Rose used to stroll together. He sat on her favorite bench, the one nestled beneath the sprawling tree with its rust-colored leaves. He remained there for hours, silently observing the people passing by. A young couple strolled past, pushing a stroller, and he couldn't tear his gaze away. He thought, that could have been me. But it wasn't. He returned home and sifted through old photos in a dusty album, his eyes lingering on an image of them dancing at someone else's wedding. Rose's smile radiated through her eyes. He, on the other hand, was just there, nothing more. For the first time, it struck him how he never genuinely smiled in photos with her. He sank to the living room floor, surrounded by albums, notes, and memories he had previously dismissed. Clarity washed over him, a clarity that was agonizingly painful. He had lost her long before he realized he even had her. In the days that followed, he desperately tried to reach her. The phone number was no longer in service. He called Rose's mother, who hung up without uttering a word. He sent text messages, but none received a reply. He even went to her parents' house, only to find it deserted. He later learned they had sold the house and moved away. Rose had become an absence, a void in his life. Robert desperately immersed himself in attempts to feign normalcy. He took a job at a mechanic's workshop, spending his days surrounded by oil and grease, trying to soil his hands in an attempt to cleanse his soul. At night, he slept on the sofa, not for comfort, but as a form of self-imposed punishment. His dreams of Rose intensified. Sometimes, she would simply look at him in silence. Other times, she would speak with eyes brimming with tears. And in some dreams, she would hand him a baby, only to snatch it away before he could even hold it. Loneliness became a constant companion, not the kind one chooses, but the kind that is forced upon you. One afternoon, as he returned from work, he found a letter at his doorstep. It had no sender, No return address, just his name written in that familiar handwriting he knew so well. With trembling hands, he opened it, only to discover it was an old note, one she must have inadvertently left in a notebook he had thrown away, and which someone had returned by chance. I saw you sleep last night. You were dreaming. Did your lips move? Did you say my name? I want to believe you did. He broke down all over again. The following day, he decided to clean the house as if he were trying to scrub away the scent of his omissions, the traces of his cowardice. He threw away what he didn't need. He gathered the notes, placed them in a box, sealed it, and hid it away. But he couldn't bring himself to discard anything that belonged to her. Even the lingering scent of her shampoo clung to the pillow, and sometimes he would rest his face there, as if seeking refuge in a safe place. Regret had now become an entity residing within him. It occupied space, it spoke to him, it prevented him from smiling. Not a single moment passed throughout the day when Rose didn't appear as a vivid memory. And the cruelest part of it all was knowing that he couldn't turn back time because she was no longer where he had left her. And, perhaps even more devastatingly, she might no longer be waiting for him. Robert then began to write. Not letters, because he had no idea where to send them, but fragmented texts, raw and unfiltered outpourings, much like this one. Today I saw a woman holding a child in her arms. They were laughing. I thought, that could have been you. That could have been ours. But it's not. I killed that possibility. And I'm still alive. That's the worst part. He wrote incessantly. Sometimes he would read aloud to the empty air. Other times, he would immediately tear up the pages, as if by writing he was trying to exorcise a ghost that he himself had conjured. One night, he ventured out on foot, aimlessly wandering through the streets. He walked through unfamiliar neighborhoods, crossed bridges, and traversed avenues. He only stopped when his body could no longer carry him. He collapsed onto a pavement and wept once more. No matter how many times he had cried, it always felt as raw and agonizing as the first. And it was there, with his face buried in his hands, that he finally understood. It wasn't just about Rose. It was about him, the man who didn't know how to love. The child who grew up hearing that feeling was a weakness. The husband who never learned to stay. And now there was nowhere left to hide. As dawn broke, and he made his way back home, he made a decision. To start anew. Not for her. Not out of regret, but because he desperately needed to rebuild himself from the inside out. But the emptiness. Oh, that emptiness remained. Because when someone departs, leaving love and silence in the same space, there is no cure. There is only coexistence. And that was precisely what Robert was learning. To coexist with the love that had arrived too late. The depth of Robert's regret is palpable. What do you think his next step will be on this difficult path to self-discovery? Can he ever truly find peace? Share your thoughts and hopes in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for the powerful climax. Time had that cruel habit of teaching lessons when there were no more exams to take. In the months that followed, Robert underwent a transformation, not like someone desperately seeking redemption, but like someone who had finally grasped the magnitude of what he had lost. His routine became more subdued, more contained. There was no more rush, no more distractions. The mechanic's workshop became his sanctuary, the only place where his mind found solace, hammering, tightening screws, fixing what was broken. The irony wasn't lost on him. He could fix almost anything, except for his own life. One afternoon, under a sky of an almost mournful blue, and with the bustling streets of Guadalajara throbbing around him, Robert found himself wandering aimlessly. He had left work early, taken a different route, and ended up in a square whose name he didn't even know. There was an old fountain, weathered stone benches, ice cream vendors, and families scattered across the parched grass. An ordinary place, indeed. But on that particular day, it was where everything came to a standstill. He saw her across the street. Rose. She was wearing a loose-fitting blouse, but it wasn't enough to conceal the gentle curve of her belly, which she cradled with both tenderness and firmness. She walked slowly, one hand resting on her back, the other protectively on her stomach. She wore a simple dress and low sandals, and her hair was tied back in a way he had never seen before. But it was undeniably her. The city continued to move around them. People passed by, cars honked, children laughed. But for Robert, everything went silent. The world lost its sound. Only that image existed, the woman he thought he had lost forever. And, even more significantly, the truth she had never revealed. The baby. He took a step forward, then another, and stopped. The impact was far greater than the initial impulse. It wasn't just surprise. It was a sharp pang in his chest and a regret that now possessed flesh, form, and movement. He felt his legs begin to buckle. He gasped for air, his eyes welled up with tears. And then he sank to the edge of the pavement without even realizing it. His head bowed, his elbows resting on his knees. There, amidst the cacophony of the city and the profound silence within him, he murmured, "She lied. She didn't abort. She protected me even from that." And he cried again, but this time it was different, because now there was something more than just guilt. There was hope. Rose crossed the square without noticing him. She entered a bakery, bought bread, exchanged a few words with the shop assistant, offered a slight smile, and then left. When she passed by him again, he remained motionless. He simply watched her. She looked tired, but whole. There was a fierce calm in her demeanor, like someone who had fallen but had chosen to rise again. That night, Robert couldn't sleep. He sat on the edge of the bed, gazing out the window, his eyes fixed on the darkness. And at some point, his mind conjured an image. Himself cradling the baby in his arms. The child looked at him with deep eyes, so similar to her mother's, and in the dream he said, "I'm sorry." Not for what had happened before, but for not having been a better man. He woke up sweating, but with a sense of clarity, like someone receiving a divine mission. He needed to truly see her, not just catch a glimpse of her on the street like a mere spectator. He needed to stand before her, look her in the eyes, and say everything that had remained unsaid. Even if she didn't forgive him, even if she didn't want to listen, he knew he couldn't show up empty-handed, or with empty words. The next morning, he requested 2 days off. He told his boss he had to take care of something personal. He boarded a bus to Oaxaca. He didn't know if she was still there, but it was the only lead he had. The road to San Geronimo seemed longer than he remembered. Each curve in the road brought back a memory. Each stop presented a new scenario of what he might say. He arrived at dusk, with the sun sinking behind the mountains. The village remained simple, quiet, like someone harboring secrets from everyone. He asked for Dona Mercedes. A child pointed to the house with the weathered roof. Robert stopped in front of the wooden gate. His heart pounded in his chest. He took a deep breath. He knocked and waited. The gate creaked before opening completely. It wasn't Rose who answered. It was Dona Mercedes. Her eyes, small and sharp, scanned Robert from head to toe, like someone examining a wounded animal that had returned to its native mountains. She said nothing at first. She simply opened the door a little wider. "Come in," she said. He obeyed. With slow steps, he crossed the packed dirt courtyard where flowers grew haphazardly, but vibrantly alive. The air was filled with the scent of earth, freshly brewed coffee, and a heavy silence. "Rose doesn't want you here," she said. Already in the kitchen, stirring something over the fire, Robert remained standing, his hands trembling and his throat dry. "I know, but I still had to come." Dona Mercedes didn't turn around. "Why?" "Because, now I understand. And I didn't come to promise anything. I just want to be here, do whatever she allows." The old woman let out a sigh that sounded more like a tired whisper. "You want to change?" He nodded, his eyes downcast. Then, she placed the wooden spoon on the counter, turned around, crossed her arms, and looked at him directly, with the sternness of someone who had witnessed too many men promise what they never delivered. "Then stay," she said. "But without romance, without promises, just presence." He swallowed hard. "She doesn't need a man. She needs help. And the baby needs a father." Those words cut into him like deep wounds, a summons, a sentence. That same night, Dona Mercedes prepared the back room. It was small, with a single bed and a wardrobe that smelled of old wood. But it was a beginning, and he accepted it humbly. Robert has arrived, ready to face his past. What do you think Rose's reaction will be? Can a relationship truly be rebuilt on the ashes of betrayal? Share your powerful thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for the profound turning point. The next day, at 6 o'clock in the morning, he heard footsteps in the kitchen. He got up before the sun had even begun to warm the tiles and went there. Rose was standing with her back to him, stirring a pot with an air of purpose, wearing an apron stained with flour. She didn't say good morning. She didn't turn around. She simply spoke, her voice dry. You don't have to pretend everything's fine. I didn't come to pretend anything, he replied in a low voice. She continued stirring the pot. How long are you staying? As long as you allow me. She stopped, took a deep breath, then resumed stirring. She said nothing else. And so it went for days. A silent, tense, but respectful coexistence. Robert began to help with small things. First, cleaning the courtyard, then going to the market carrying bags. He tended to the chicken coop, changed the water for the plants, prepared buckets of warm water when Rose's back ached. He learned to make cinnamon tea, just as Donna Mercedes had taught him. He observed in silence. He paid attention. One day, he saw Rose trying to reach something on a high shelf. She stretched, huffed, and persisted. He approached slowly. May I? She hesitated, and for the first time, she looked him in the eyes. Only if you ask permission. He took a deep breath. May I help you, Rose? She looked away and slowly stepped aside. It was just a jar of flour. But for him, it was a world. Time passed. The days were long. But something was changing, even though no one spoke of it. One hot afternoon, while Donna Mercedes napped in the hammock and Rose rested with her feet propped up on a stool, Robert wrestled with the patio faucet. The water pressure was low. Water splashed everywhere, and he muttered curses. Damn it. Just hope this garbage doesn't explode now. Rose heard him, and for the first time, she let out a laugh, brief but genuine. He turned, surprised, and she lowered her head as if she had been caught by an affection she didn't want to acknowledge. What was that? He asked, risking the question. Nothing. It's just that you haven't changed that much. He smiled, unsure if that was good or bad, but it was a sign. In her room, on the wooden crib, there was a teddy bear. The very same one from the beginning of their marriage, the one he had once brought without much thought, in a gesture that felt too small for what was missing between them. Now that teddy bear was there, a silent witness to a time that no longer existed. One day, while Rose was folding baby clothes, he entered slowly. May I? She didn't reply, but she didn't chase him away either. He approached the crib, carefully touched the teddy bear. Then he looked at her. I wish I could go back, do everything differently. She stopped, looked at him. There were tears in her eyes, but also a steely resolve. But you can't. I know, and it's no use telling me you've changed. I don't want to hear it. I need to see it, feel it. He nodded. That's what I'm trying to do. The silence between them was no longer an abyss. It was a bridge under construction. Slow, precarious, but real. Weeks passed. Robert was still there, present, silent, firm, and Rose, little by little, began to breathe differently. Still with fear, still with reservations. But something in her also changed because love sometimes doesn't return. It is reborn from scratch in a different form. And no one there was in a hurry because broken pieces, when carefully glued together, form something stronger than before, even if they never become the same again. A slow, painful, but genuine rebuilding of trust. What do you think the future holds for Robert and Rose? Will their silent efforts be enough to mend a shattered past? Share your hopes in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for the breathtaking climax. In that early morning hour, time seemed to fall out of sync. The house was dark, and the entire world slept, except for her. Rose's scream was sharp, intense, and pierced the walls like muffled thunder. Robert, who had been a light sleeper since moving into the small back room, sprang from bed as if under attack. He didn't even bother to put on his shoes. He ran through the house, his eyes burning and his heart pounding wildly. He found her hunched over in the hallway, clutching her belly with both hands, drenched in cold sweat. "Rose!" he cried, approaching her. "She's coming now," she murmured through clenched teeth, her voice rasped by pain. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed the keys, opened the front gate, and started the car, leaving the headlights off. Donna Mercedes was already standing, as if she had known all along. She simply handed him the hospital bag, without uttering a word. Robert ran to Rose and helped her into the car. Neither of them said a word. The drive to the hospital felt like crossing a minefield. Potholes, rocks, curves, and in the passenger seat, the woman he had once sworn not to love, and who now was the only person he wanted to see breathe. "Breathe with me, Rose. Come on, take a deep breath." "I know what I have to do," she said through clenched teeth. "Just drive." And he drove with the utmost care, like someone carrying something sacred. In the hospital, the corridor reeked of disinfectant and urgency. Doctors rushed back and forth, and he felt his legs tremble as they wheeled her away in a wheelchair. "Are you the father?" they asked. He hesitated for a second, but not to think, only to let the weight of the words settle within him. "Yes, I am." They allowed him to enter. He stayed by her side, holding her hand tightly. During contractions, she squeezed so hard that his fingers throbbed. But he didn't let go. "Rose," he murmured. She didn't reply, but she didn't let go of him either. The hours stretched into what felt like weeks. The labor was difficult, prolonged, but at one point, the sound that filled that room was not a scream of pain. It was a small, new cry, a sharp, piercing cry, the kind of sound that is born only once and changes everything. Robert felt his legs fail him. He had to lean against the wall for support. Tears streamed down his face before he could even stop them. "It's a girl," the nurse said, her voice filled with emotion, as she handed him the clean baby, wrapped in a blanket. Rose slowly turned her face, exhausted, depleted, but alive, and she saw when he received their daughter into his arms. Robert held her like someone holding fire, but also hope, his eyes wide, his hands trembling. She was so small, so light, so real. "Hello, little one." "Hello," he whispered, his voice breaking. He looked at Rose. Her eyes were filled with tears. Without makeup, without armor, just her human, hurting, strong. She gave a slight nod, as if giving permission, as if acknowledging something. And he understood. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was something. A step. In the days that followed, the house changed. Silence gave way to cries, hurried footsteps, boiling water, bottles, warm cloths. Rose breastfed with watchful eyes, and Robert offered to hold the baby after each feeding. He learned to change diapers, to warm water to the right temperature, to soothe cries with soft music. Donna Mercedes observed from afar. She didn't say much, but her gaze held a contained peace, like someone watching a barren field begin to bloom. One ordinary afternoon, she was sitting with the baby in her arms, cradling her carefully. The sun filtering through the window gilded her white hair. Robert and Rose were in the kitchen, separated by the table, exchanging brief glances, trying to decipher the new language emerging between them. Donna Mercedes beckoned them with a gesture. They approached. "Now she's yours," she said bluntly, looking at the sleeping child in her lap. "What I could do, I've done. A house, a test, and love from both sides." She handed the baby to Rose delicately, like someone returning a miracle. Rose held her in her arms with almost shy affection. She looked at Robert. He said nothing. He just looked at her in the eyes. "I still don't forgive you," Rose said, her voice firm yet broken. "I don't expect that, but I think I want to." That phrase, spoken with eyes full of fear but also tenderness, was the beginning of everything that could still be. He smiled. "It's okay. While I wait, I'll care." And she believed him because there's a difference between someone who returns and someone who stays. And he was there, without promises, without speeches, just with his presence. And at that moment, though no wound was completely healed, they were a family. Not perfect, but possible. A new life, a fragile hope. What do you think this shared vulnerability means for Robert and Rose's future? Can love truly be reborn after such pain? Share your raw emotions in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for the beautiful conclusion. Time passed with slow steps, as if it knew that haste doesn't suit reconstruction. The days in that house were no longer made of sharp silences, but of new sounds. The patter of tiny feet in the hallway, the shy laughter of a little girl beginning to explore the world, and the soft conversations between two people who at last were learning to listen to each other. Robert woke up early. The sun had barely stretched over the rooftops when he was already dressed, his hands rough and his lunch packed by Rose. The construction site was a half-hour walk away. It was hard work, but dignified, and for him it was more than that. It was the opportunity to build something solid, both externally and internally. He returned in the afternoon, his body covered in dust and his face tanned by the sun. But upon crossing the wooden gate, he always found the same scene. Rose sitting on the terrace with their little girl on her lap or at her feet, playing with scraps of fabric, dry leaves, and inventing stories for every new sound she learned to make. "Your bath is ready," Rose would say without looking at him as he took off his dirty boots. It was routine, but it wasn't automatic. It was care, a care that had been born slowly, like everything that needed to be reborn. After his bath, they would drink tea. Cinnamon tea with more sugar than he liked, but which she said helped him relax. It was in those moments that they looked into each other's eyes. They didn't talk about the past. There was no need. The important thing was what they were building. The baby, now teething and taking unsteady steps, had become the center of their universe. Each new syllable, each attempt to say mommy or daddy, was celebrated with restrained joy, as if they feared fate would hear them and come to collect its due. Rose smiled more, and it was a different smile than he remembered. Before, she smiled with hope. Now, she did so with presence. The smile of someone who no longer expects anything, just lives. Robert, seeing her like this, felt a silent gratitude, not for being forgiven, but for being allowed, for being received, even without having completely rewritten their story. For her having chosen to stay even though she didn't have to. Sundays were the favorite days in that house. They woke up unhurriedly. Donna Mercedes prepared bread in the wood-fired oven, and after lunch, she told stories from when she was young. The little girl listened, not understanding much, but always applauding at the end. And everyone laughed. Rose sometimes. Rose looked at Robert and saw a completely different man. A man she hadn't known before. This wasn't someone who just asked for forgiveness with empty words, but with tangible actions. He'd come home exhausted, but still managed to muster the energy to tell a story or finally fix that dripping faucet that had been driving them crazy for days. She didn't verbally forgive him anymore, but every night as she drifted off to sleep beside him, she would rest her head right on his chest. And that simple act felt like more than enough. It was on one of those nights, with their little girl sound asleep on his lap and a warm, gentle breeze sweeping across the terrace, that it all unfolded. Robert slowly knelt down, not rushed or out of any kind of fear, but with a sense of serenity that Rose had never witnessed in him before. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, unassuming cardboard box. Inside was a simple ring, unadorned with any stones or sparkle, but clean, carefully chosen, and paid for with long days of hard work and even longer nights of saving every spare penny. "Rose," he began, "I was a complete idiot. I loved you from the very beginning, but I was too damn foolish to even realize it." His voice was steady and resolute, but his eyes betrayed him, trembling with a deep emotion. She just looked at him, completely speechless. The little girl was still fast asleep, breathing softly as if everything in the whole world was exactly as it should be. "You are my home, my strength, my courage. Will you please marry me again? This time solely for love. Just for love." Time seemed to stand still. Rose glanced down at their little girl, and then back up at him. Her eyes began to well up with tears, Not tears of sadness or regret, but tears born of overwhelming emotion. She took her time to reply, because she fully understood the weight of that simple yes. It was a fresh start, not about forgetting the past, but about looking back on it as someone remembering the long, winding path that had eventually led them to this very moment. Yes, now yes, I will. Robert closed his eyes for just a brief moment, like a man breathing a deep sigh of relief, like someone finally finding shelter in the quiet shadows of the backyard, hidden among the plants. Donna Mercedes was watching it all from a distance. She didn't approach or interfere. She simply smiled to herself. A knowing, gentle smile of someone who understands that some harvests just take a little longer to come to fruition, but that they always bloom eventually. Now that's a real family, she murmured quietly, turning back inside with a light and happy heart. Out on the terrace, the moon seemed to be listening to everything that was being said. And there, underneath a vast sky filled with countless invisible witnesses, 3 lives became deeply intertwined, not with empty promises or grand gestures, but with small acts of kindness, with the heavy weight of all that had come before, and the light, airy hope of all that could still be. Love wasn't some distant utopia anymore. It was present in every single day. True love doesn't always start with flowery promises or declarations. Sometimes it begins with stumbles and falls, with extended silences, with unseen wounds that no one else knows about, but also with conscious choices, with someone who, even after everything, still decides to stay right by your side. Because to truly love someone isn't just about saying the words, it's about genuinely caring. It's about actively listening. It's about returning, and about deserving the chance to stay. And sometimes what begins with so much pain and heartache ultimately ends with a baby sleeping peacefully in your arms, and a heart that finally understands what it truly means to love and be loved. If you felt this story all the way to the very end, let me know you were right here with me. Write in the comments below, I stayed, because whoever stays until the end understands the true value of a brand new beginning.